Well, the Indian Prime Minister took the center stage in the heart of America's democracy in a rare honor, demonstrating the deepening India-US ties. The Prime Minister made his second address to the US Congress. The Indian Prime Minister received a rousing welcome as he delivered a speech to Congress celebrating the growing ties and shared ambitions of the world's two largest democracies. The Indian Prime Minister also spoke about the menace of terror and asserted that there should be no ifs or buts when it comes to combating terrorism. The Prime Minister also praised the role of Indian Americans and hailed the US Vice President's Indian roots, drawing applause from the congressmen. Well, the Indian Prime Minister continues with his 4-day US trip, and right now he's at the White House, where he will be hosted for a state dinner and a state banquet with the US President Joe Biden and the First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, who have already received the Indian Prime Minister at the White House South Lawn. And our correspondent Jessica Stone is indeed at the White House. She's joining us live for an update of this. Jessica, has the event begun?
Yes, and I want to let you know that we've gotten the guest list from the White House, and I'll read off a couple of names you might have recognized. Not all of them Indian American, by the way. Ralph Lauren, the designer, John Mueller of Procter & Gamble, the CEO of MasterCard, the CEO of Micron, the former Pepsi CEO, Ms. Indra Nooyi, Mr. Maulik Pancholi, the 30 Rock actor who played Jonathan. We've also got a couple of musicians, Samir Patel, San Diego Youth Symphony conductor, Sundar Pichai of Google, M. Night Shyamalan, very famous in this country for directing the Sixth Sense movie, Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD, which is a semiconductor manufacturer, the CEO of FedEx, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, and of course a number of hedge fund and money managers of various ethnicities, but all of them American. It's a really diverse group of people, but a very powerful group of people. And this was the ticket in town to get. About 400 guests were told by the White House coming to the South Lawn. We did not get a chance to see the guests as they entered. They usually enter on the side of the Executive Office building there, and then come through to the South Lawn, where they are fortunately undercover tonight because it is still a bit rainy here in Washington, D.C., and they are feasting in the pavilion on the South Lawn with lots of silk fabric hanging from the ceiling and a number of goodies that we've already previewed for you, I believe. I think I told you I got to taste some of them even.
Yes, you did. Jessica, talking about diversity and talking about not only talking about the feast of the night, so to speak, fashion is something to look out for. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi did indicate that India is diversifying the culture. Have you spotted some interesting wares or designs or fashion?
I'm afraid I have not. At our perch here, we are seeing much more fashion of the honor guard and the color guard and the various business suits that people wear to cover the White House. So, but I can tell you that within vision, at least, I saw that beautiful green, sparkly dress worn by the First Lady. And I'm still looking for updates on who the designer was for that. We usually get that kind of information. Right. Excuse me while I just check my pool notes here. Yes, they've done their pictures. but I don't see any information yet on
the designer.
So that will be up and coming, and probably some breaking news on social media, right?
Emerald green. Dr. Jill Biden was wearing an emerald green shimmery dress. I don't know how to describe it. I'm not a fashionista, but when it comes to some of the clothes that some of these dignitaries and some of these guests are wearing, it's pretty clear that they wanted a touch of Indian culture in them. But Jessica, going forward and in this whole banquet or this whole state dinner, what are some of the symbolic elements of this state dinner that we should look out for apart from the meals?
Well, there's a lot of decor that echoes some of the symbolic symbols of India itself. You've got the lotus flower that will be, according to the social secretary, prominently displayed in various locations around the dining area. You've got the tricolor flag and the colors of the peacock, the national bird, in all of the silk decor, and represented in the greens of the tablescapes and the cloths that are draping the tables. You know, Dr. Biden told us during the preview that her favorite colors are blue and green. Mm-hmm. So it was not actually a surprise to me to see her in green, but that was surely a breathtaking dress. And the saffron from the Indian flag is also going to be echoed in the floral arrangements. I got to see some of them yesterday, and they're very diverse. There's no two tables that will be the same. Dr. Jill Biden's sort of moniker when it comes to floral arranging is that it should be unique to each table. So you're going to see a flurry of different saffrons, yellows, oranges, deeper burnt oranges, in roses, in peonies, in dragon flowers, in ranunculus. It's a beautiful display and very casual and unique, as I said, to each table. So those are some of the colors. Now, the state bird of India is, of course, the peacock. And so the blues and the greens from those peacock feathers, we're told by the social secretary, will be very prominent in the decor of the event. And in fact, the toasts by the Prime Minister and by the President of the United States will be made in front of images of their respective state birds. So the U.S. bald eagle and the Indian peacock just behind them. So I'm anxious to see photos and images. I haven't seen very much yet to get a broader picture, but can you imagine 400 people on the South Lawn? That's a tremendous undertaking. It is. We'll have to see what all of this entails when we get those images.
Indeed, Jessica Stone, she is live at the White House. We are still waiting for the ceremony, the state dinner, to officially begin. We'll be, listening to some of the speeches that will be made by the president, who's hosting the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Jessica Stone, stay with me. We'll be talking more about these significant state event at the White House. And joining us now is Richard Russell, a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies from Washington, D.C. Welcome to WION World is One, and thank you very much for joining us at this hour. Probably you can start by telling us what you've observed so far in this visit by the Indian Prime Minister when it comes to issues of diplomacy, when it comes to issues of bilateral relations between America and India.
Well, this visit has been a lot more than pomp and circumstance. We talk about the state visit, the state dinner, and all the highly visible events that have taken place and will be taking place, because, of course, we're only halfway through the visit overall. But we finally saw today some things that have been hinted at before, but the formal statement by the two governments, as well as the accompanying fact sheet. And they got a lot of business done, a lot of critical areas that we've been pushing on. Looking at stronger defense cooperation, better commercial integration, but also people-to-people ties. So the dinner may be fancy, the events may be very highly visible, but the substance on the visit has been tremendous, and I think moves the ball forward in the relationship in significant ways.
Moving the ball forward, we had the U.S. President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi insisting that the people-to-people relation between Americans and Indians should be bolstered going forward. We had the Indian Prime Minister saying that they hope that American investments will make, investors rather, will make their way to India and start investing in India and developing India. What would you say about what the Indian Prime Minister said?
Well, people to people has been there through thick and thin. I've been working this beat for 25 years. We've seen commercial relations wax and wane depending on how well policy reform and anti-reform is going in both countries. Even security relations. You know, we announced to much fanfare the civilian nuclear agreement almost 20 years ago, but then that fizzled out when India's parliament couldn't move a clean liability law through, and that kind of the bottom dropped out of security cooperation, strategic cooperation for a bit. But all throughout, you've got Indian students coming here, you've got businesses going in both directions, you've got Indian health professionals, technology workers. People-to-people contacts have been quite strong throughout. And as you look through the joint statement and some of the announcements, the idea about making it easier for Indians to renew visas, making it easier to get to a consular section by an expansion of the number of consulates, and higher education cooperation. There's a lot that I think is going to really help what has already been a relatively strong area of cooperation. But you're right. When we talk about strategic relations and commercial relations, India's at a unique point when you see a lot of companies, both because of security concerns, but also the lessons of COVID, trying to diversify supply chains. India would love to grab a lion's share of that. And that's not something the U.S. government can put on the table necessarily. Right. But Prime Minister Modi has been personally engaging a lot of companies in areas India's prioritized, like semiconductors. And you see a number of significant announcements, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in strategic sectors, commercial sectors that India desires. So policy is one great thing, but sometimes you got to talk directly to companies. And Prime Minister Modi has shown fairly adept at being able to do so.
Richard, the Indian Prime Minister not only meets the President of the United States, that's Joe Biden, and the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, he will also interact with the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a wide range of issues. But on focus right now is efforts by India to enhance business and trade with America. And the Prime Minister is expected to meet CEOs at the Kennedy Center sometime later today. When it comes to business and trade with America, do you think America, I know this is a very complex question, but do you think America is the viable partner when it comes to such issues as trade, for instance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, today, the United States is India's single largest trade partner. Although if you add Hong Kong to China, they beat us out by a little bit in goods trade. But if you add services to it, the United States is by far India's largest trade partner. India is our 8th largest trade partner from the U.S. viewpoint and climbing that ladder relatively quickly. You look at foreign direct investment, there's heavy doses moving in both directions. And on the trade front, the United States is actually the only major country with which India has a trade surplus. So from India's vantage point, we've already become the economic partner of choice, and that's only kind of grown over time. But, you know, to your point, can that begin to hit the numbers that we've seen with our largest trade partners or our largest investment partners, Mexico, Canada, China? That's a difficult club to break into, but not impossible. The challenge, of course, is that in India, a lot of the decisions that have to happen that's really going to help to accelerate India's ability to attract global manufacturing are things that Prime Minister Modi himself does not actually control. Right. A lot of what companies look for in India, whether you talk about reliable access to electric power, flexible labor regulations, easy land acquisition, things like that, mostly controlled by state governments. So I'd say the next wave of agenda, which wasn't really reflected, I think, in the joint statement, was really trying to expand U.S. connections directly with state governments. If states started getting it right in India, then I think that groundswell of investment that we've seen with other markets will start to happen in even greater droves. So opening consulates and such is good, but I would like to see in the future more cooperation directly with states so businesses can communicate more effectively exactly what they need to make that investment environment better.
Richard, another topic that was keenly talked about by the Indian Prime Minister and also the President was on the issue of terrorism. And we do know that India shares a good relationship with the United States, and so does Pakistan. And Modi says that India and America are walking shoulder to shoulder in the fight against terrorism and radicalism, and added that during his talks with Biden, the two sides have agreed that concerted action is necessary to end cross-border terrorism. When it comes to the United States of America, will it be hard for US to, balance all of these issues?
When we talk about our respective relations with India and Pakistan, I know from Delhi's perspective, sometimes when we have a visit by a Pakistani official or announce some small program, it feels like the hyphen has been reinserted. But when you think about the incredible ground that we've managed to cross with India, civilian nuclear cooperation, the level of military interoperability that we've got, there's no relation. It's 99-1 in terms of the amount of strategic weight that we put on both. There is some utility to Pakistan, which, of course, when we talk about attempting to maintain some relations with Taliban indirectly, the attempts to liquidate the last remnants of al-Qaeda, Pakistan had some utility and will continue to do so. But I think that is a very narrow relationship that we've got with very specific objectives. And I think we have our eyes more wide open than we did before, knowing that Pakistan some days works against our interest, and then sometimes, like right now, with political instability, can barely walk two steps in any direction.
Then there's the issue of China. The Biden administration has decided to largely, remain publicly quiet on India's democratic backsliding and also the human rights situation in India and also in China. Do you think the US will intensify their efforts to keep New Delhi on its side in the growing rivalry with China?
I think this incredible courtship that you see, the direct relationship that the two have been really trying to accentuate, but then platforms that we're engaging in together like the Quad, these are a significant portion of this engagement, directly and indirectly, has been about our shared concern about some of the dangerous elements of the rise of China. I do think, there's still more work to be done. For instance, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific and China presenting a major threat, there are differences between Delhi and DC in terms of how we characterize that. From India's perspective, and rightly so, you think about the contested border areas and the continued encroachment in some of India's smaller neighbors like Bhutan, as well as China's increased military presence in the Indian Ocean. Those aren't really tier one for most American security analysts. When we think of the Indo-Pacific and China threats, most Americans would think of the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea, the militarization that's happened there, continued challenges in the East China Sea, and even Pacific Islands. So I think you also saw in the joint statement better recognition by the United States that we need to get smarter and get more active in ways that are supportive of India's interest in the Indian Ocean. Right. And I think that's going to be vital to unlocking a next wave of cooperation. Issues of democratic backsliding and such, look, it's a mixed bag, of course. There is no right and wrong, and there is no single answer to what we're seeing in India. You've had some challenges against religious tolerance and crackdown on some NGOs and others, but democracy is still vibrant. We just saw it with the Karnataka elections when an entrenched BJP government lost handily, and many other state governments as well. And we've got challenges too, so I suppose it'll get raised privately and directly. And I think that Prime Minister Modi will have some important points and questions to raise as well, because we've got our own threats happening in this country right now.
I'm talking to Richard Rosso. He's a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Richard, stay with me.